What's up, everyone? 7 October's here with another episode of Nightmare on Sedgwick Avenue, the home of hip hop and horror. And today we have a guest. I've actually been wanting to get him on the podcast since I came across one of his books that we'll talk about today. But his name is Angel Luis Colon. He's an author, writer, critic, creative overall. So, welcome, Angel, to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm fantastic. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to have you. And actually, I had to put the book and bring it over here.
Ah,
Infested, which I think I want to say like Instagram is the one that put me onto it, because they're
that's
always
great to
watching, you
hear.
know. um,
That
and
algorithm gets me.
right, yeah. And I saw the cover. I think came up like on an ad or something, and I was just like, I love the. Let me show you one more time. I love like the cover of it, like the artwork. So that's what caught me, honestly. Like, I'm one of those people, where it's like, don't judge a book by its cover, but I am one of those people. And I was like, oh, okay, I have to like look into this. And I know it's like I'm not the intended audience. It's like a young adults, but I was like, this is really, really dope. And I bought it. I think the latter part of last year. But honestly, I hadn't got around to it, and then I just picked it up like a month ago, and I read it like maybe in 2, 3 sittings. It was like one of those where it's like you can't put it down because I just wanted to like finish the story and see where it went. So before we get into that, I kind of want to talk about like how did like your love for like writing, like where did that start, and how did like for this specific book, like the horror writing, how did that love come?
So I always tell people, and most people don't believe me, and I don't blame them.
Yeah.
But I don't remember learning to read. Like as far as I know, I always knew.
Yeah.
And my mom used to like to brag and say like, "Oh, I taught you how to read when you were 18 months old." I have a hard time believing that,
Yeah.
but maybe I picked it up early. So I was always a voracious reader for as long as I can remember. I couldn't get enough. I read everything I could. And I grew up in the Bronx. We didn't have a lot, so it was the library was where I got everything from. And when I could buy books, it was like the cheapest books you can get on the Scholastic page. So it was like all the Penguin classics and all that crap.
Yeah.
And so I read and reread all that stuff. And it wasn't until I was maybe 14 that I hadn't checked out anything horror. I was up until I was maybe 9 years old. I was scared of everything.
Okay.
Like my uncles introduced me to the thing when I was 5, and that kind of put enough PTSD into me to
Yeah.
avoid everything for a while. But I was 14, and I got my pass to use the train so I can go downtown. I was allowed finally, and I went to 86th Street in Lexington. There used to be a Barnes and Noble down there because we didn't have bookstores in the Bronx, and I was just blown away. I'd never been to a Barnes and Noble. It was gigantic, right? Like there's so many books. And I found the horror section, and my eye was drawn to Books of Blood, Volume 1 by Clive Barker. There was something about it that caught me. And this was back in the day that, it was like maybe $4.99. It wasn't a lot of money.
Yeah.
So I picked it up with my pocket money and, got back on the train to get back uptown, and I started reading it. And the first story in that collection is Midnight Meat Train. And there I am on the subway reading the story about people getting killed in the subway. And it's like the winter, it's like 9 p.m., it's dark, and I'm crapping my pants. I was just terrified, but I couldn't stop. It from the minute I read word one, it grabbed me. And that was it. That was like this weird moment. I was like, I want to do this to people. I didn't know why, but I was like, oh man, I want to make people feel this way. you
Yeah.
know. And then that's when I got real obsessed with like writing and introduced myself to Stephen King, Dean Koontz, tons of other writers that were out there, and just became voracious for horror. And yeah, that was really the Barker is all it. That was my North Star. That's like my idol.
That's pretty dope. Yeah, and I love that what you said too in the beginning of how you said that you can't even remember how you learned how to read. Like, I can kind of like you saying that. It kind of like I can relate to that because same here. Like, I grew up here in San Diego, but my grandma, like, I don't know. It was just like back in the day. Like, it wasn't like like now where you have internet and all that stuff. Like before, it was like playing outside, reading books, TV or whatever. And so same thing. Like I remember just going to the library. It was like a thing to do, like with my grandma and my sisters, and we just go and read. And it's like you created your own universe, like just reading, like you said, the books that like your mind would make up these like if it was a good writer, you can picture yourself in these universes or whatever it was. And I remember, like for me, kind of similar to you. I think mine started more with like the kid horror ones, like the or like young adult, kind of like invested a little bit with like what's it called, Stories to Tell in the Dark and Goosebumps and all those. That's kind of where I started, like as a kid, and then it kind of like then watching horror movies and stuff like that. But that's pretty interesting that you said that about like never learning how to read. It's just something you already did. Like so,
Yeah,
I
no.
can relate to that.
It
Yeah,
always felt like, it was a thing that I loved.
natural.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can't remember a time where I didn't love reading.
That's pretty cool. And when did you like? If you could say, obviously, you said like Clive Barker was the one, like your introduction to like more of the horror, but like in general, like that got you to like fall in love with like just reading. Like, do you remember what book you would say, like the first book that you ever like picked up that you're like, oh man, this is like dope.
I think it's gonna be funny, but I think the one book that because I remember as a kid reading it and then immediately reading it again was Pinocchio.
Oh, okay, okay.
And I don't know, not a lot of people have read the book. Everybody's familiar with it from the Disney,
The
but
movie, yeah.
the book is dark. The book is messed up. There's like an entire scene where they hang his ass. Like it's messed up. And I remember just being like mystified by that.
Yeah.
And it's such a weird book that like those, because like I said, what we could afford with the cheaper books, and those were always like the public domain things. So yeah, Pinocchio, Swiss Family Robinson. I used to love that book. Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn, all that stuff. So
Yeah.
that was like the that canon, right? Like I guess that's part. I don't know if that's the literary canon, but that's like the kid literary canon,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like that's like the stuff that that's just out there for you to read, and then from there, like other books that I got into, because of school, but I ended up really falling in love with like To Kill a Mockingbird, of Mice and Men.
Oh yeah,
Um,
Mice and Men. I remember that one. Yeah.
yeah, my son actually just read that for school, and I was like, "Oh, that's gonna break." I remember that broke me. Actually, I remember like sitting down in sixth grade at the pizzeria my mom's boyfriend owned, and
Yeah.
just weeping by the end of that thing.
Yeah, I
But
felt
those were
so
like,
bad. Like Lenny was like, sorry to interrupt you, but Lenny was like for me like a Frankenstein. Like I felt so
yeah,
bad for the guy, because it
no, it was
wasn't really his
brutal.
fault, right? Like,
None of it was his fault, man. And it's like then that was like, and then from there I got into Steinbeck. I remember reading like The Pearl and all that stuff. So a lot of my initial, it's funny to think about how a lot of my initial reading experiences were with old white men. It was like all white dudes, mostly dead white dudes.
yeah,
But it was interesting that like a lot of that stuff was, I mean, that was the only thing that was available at the time, right? Like it wasn't like
yeah,
there was a
we
lot
didn't
of
have a lot of
diversity. No.
diversity. I was gonna say there wasn't really like we could see ourselves. That's why like I loved about your book, and we'll get into it in a little bit. But like the fact that I can see myself like in like the newer writers now, right? Where it's like more diversity, and you can see yourself in the characters. Before, like you said, it was all like white people, or that was like the predominantly like what it was. So it's like we either take it or leave it.
Yep.
But it's cool that you say Pinocchio, because I haven't read the book. Now you made me want to read the book. But obviously the movie, I even thought about it, is like, because it's kind of like all those Disney movies are like grim, based off grim fairy tales. So they're not supposed to be like nice. They're actually darker than they are. But I always thought Pinocchio, like that was one of my favorite like Disney ones. And I feel like that donkey scene is like a werewolf transformation scene. I always thought it was
Donkey's
kind of creepy.
crazy. Yeah, the one kid, that like the redheaded kid, when he starts changing, I remember being
Yeah.
like a little kid and be like damaged by that. That was
Yeah. That was
absolutely
horror.
fuck.
I feel like that was a
Yeah,
horror.
it's body horror, right? Like they're drinking a bunch
Yeah.
of fake. Well, it's supposed to be root beer, but right, like
Yeah.
they're getting tanked and they turn into donkeys.
Yeah, so I was like that. You say that, it's kind of funny how it kind of connects, but kind of to tie it back to Infested, the book that I read about you, like the first book I've ever read, and I know you have other series, other like the Black Jaguar is like a series, right?
Yeah,
That you,
so more adult stuff. Yeah, but yeah, Blackie Jaguar and a couple of other things.
and that's more like, is it more psychological thrillers or what
No,
genre
those
would
like so when I first came in, and with the indie imprints I worked with, it was mostly very pulp fiction, crime. So like loud, fun, popcorn. But that was like I think that it's interesting to think about those books because I still love them and I still loved writing them, but it was from a very different phase in my writing career. I always talk about how, just going back to the fact that, all we were exposed to was old dead white dudes.
Yeah.
And let me not talk, I'm a pale guy, but it's, I think in the beginning of phases of my writing, I was still stuck in that mode. So it really wasn't until Infested that I think Infested I look at as more of a debut because it was when I finally wrote something as a Puerto Rican.
That's dope. So it's kind of like, do you feel like you found your voice, like that's where you found your lane, and you were trying to like, or do you see, or you think you just evolved as a writer?
I think it's an evolution, coming into writing, especially coming in with a name like mine, Angel Colon, and Angel Luis Colon, however people say it, but like, that was a big decision for me to just use my name because it's got an accent in it and everything. It's fancy, but that was a struggle, and at first, you kind of fall back on that fear of like, well, I'm immediately othered, so I can't write other stories, right? Like I have to write stories that are comfortable, and that I think has changed in my mind. Now now I don't want to make anybody comfortable, and Infested was kind of my first stab at that.
I love it, and I also get the fact that as a creative, like you also don't want to be boxed into, because it's like a lot of people, it's like, oh, if you're Latino, you can only write like Latino stories, right? And that's not it either.
No, not at all.
Because you can write a little bit of everything. And I think I was reading one of your blogs, and you talked a little bit about that, like how sometimes like they want us to just write about our trauma and like the stuff that we deal with in the type of culture that we're in, and people feed off of that, but that's not all we are. We're more than that.
No, we're much
that's what it's about this story, because you have a little bit of characters, different types of characters or archetypes, I guess you could call them. But if you want to just, I'll pass it on to you as far as like for those listening in that haven't come across your book. If you want to give like a brief synopsis of the book, and then we can kind of dig into it.
So Infested is about a young kid named Manny who's going into senior high school, and his parents, his mother and his stepfather, kind of upend his life by telling him, "Hey, we're moving from Texas to the Bronx. Surprise!" And they move out because of his stepfather's job. He's a building manager, and they end up in a building that's about to open in a section of the Bronx that's being thoroughly gentrified. And he begins to have experiences in the building, and ultimately ends up encountering something old that was already there that kind of wants people out for incredibly racist reasons.
And where did the inspiration like behind like the book come? Obviously, you're like from the Bronx, you said, and everything like that, but what like inspired this story specifically?
So a lot of it, I mean, the original pitch was just I wanted to do, something in the Bronx. I think I told my agent like I wanted to do some kind of like a take on Apt Pupil, something like that, but in the Bronx, because I've been thinking a lot about, again, going back to trying to write something Puerto Rican, but not in the vein that white audiences necessarily want. I wasn't concerned with writing something about a young man's pain in the Bronx. That was the last thing I wanted to write about. Yeah. So I thought a lot about how nowadays we're seeing with fascist movements. Oddly enough, you see a lot of Latina young men being a part of that. Yeah. And it runs the gamut. You got that one idiot who was part of the Proud Boys is a brown Cuban. But a lot of guys like me get involved in that crap, and that's always bothered me. I've always been very anti-fascist, and I never quite understood how just because of the luck of the colonization draw that you happen to look more like your genociders than other folks, that you would side with them. I think that's bonkers, So I thought a lot about that, and I realized, as a kid, you kind of, especially when you're light-skinned, you're faced with a decision at some point where you either have to decide to embrace your privilege and just ride it out, or try to find a balance. And I'm not going to pretend that I did. I absolutely rode my privilege, and it took me a long time to wake up to the fact that no matter what I do, I'm always going to be Puerto Rican, and being a Puerto Rican means that I have been actively erased for almost 500,000 years. Our people have been murdered, they've been erased, they've been marginalized, they've been made to be invisible, and it's still happening, right? Yeah. So I really wanted to write a book about that. When you reach that age, what does it take for you to get over your privilege and really embrace who you are and try to be an ally. And it's not pretty, it's not going to be pretty. It's a learning experience, but I was really interested in, what is that like? So I kind of used Manny as that vehicle, because Manny's a light-skinned Puerto Rican kid who did not grow up in the Bronx, so he has no connection to this place. He's of privilege. He went to private school his entire life, and now he's thrust in this situation where a neighborhood hates him. He's got a lot of anger inside of him. He's lost his grandparents, so he's kind of struggling. And his stepfather and his mother are driving him nuts. They've got a baby they're worried about, so he feels left out. All these things are stacked up, right? Like all your typical reasons why a teenager is going to be feeling angst. And the one person he ends up connecting, well, actually the two people he ends up connecting with are opposite sides of the coin, right? So he connects with an Afro-Latina who was kind of in essence against him because she's protesting the building. And then he connects with this old German gentleman who, has that weird air about him. He's a very old school, but there's a connection that the kid feels for him because he lost his grandfather, and he's kind to him. And, even though there's one or two moments where he says, he's like, you're one of the good ones, things like that. But that's the thing. And growing up, I heard from a lot of older white men, like, oh, you're good. You're one of the good ones, right? So I wanted to play with that and kind of explore, what happens to you when you're in that situation. And I was focused on that because being a white Latino, I didn't want to stand here and try to pretend I have the perspective of my Afro-Latino or brown Latino cousins, because I don't. I don't experience 90% of the crap they do. So I said to myself, who am I to try to go write about the brown experience? Let me write about the lessons I've learned in life to be a better Puerto Rican and a better ally to my people. And that was the focus of the book.
I love that, because I'm glad you brought that up, because I did notice that. That's what I loved about the I forget what the friend's name. What was Afro-Latina? What was her character's name? Yes.
Sasha.
So so I can relate, like you said, like with her. But I love the fact that because I love that you wrote that in the book, that obviously he's lighter skinned, and that is true. Like as whatever type of Latino you are, when you're light skinned, you do have a privilege, and I admire that you say that, because a lot of people don't see it sometimes. And it's funny too, because I'm a twin. We're fraternal, but my twin sister's like lighter skinned than me. Like I guess I'm brown. I'm not too brown, but her experience is different than mine. Like it's just because of the skin tone. So I really love that. Like I said, in this book, like I could see a lot of myself in her character, just because like when she even tells him like, well, he treats you fine, like the German guy, like Mueller. And she's like, but not to me. Like she doesn't like me because of how I look. And I was like, I can relate to that so much. And then the fact that his character, Manny's character, was like a little bit naive about it, because like you said, he came to like a melting pot, like the Bronx, where like Texas is a little bit different, right? At least like from, if you're talking about the characters specifically. Yeah. But I really love that because you don't see that a lot in, like I said, in books that I've read in the past. Because nobody's writing it from like a Latino perspective, so I thought that was really interesting, and I love that, the fact that you wrote that into the book.
And like I said before, wanting to write for a Puerto Rican audience, I thought, well, what are problems that we have? What are problems we should be paying attention to? And one of them is the colorism in our communities. There's immense colorism in our communities, and immense anti-indigenous aspects too. So I wanted to really get into that and explore why we're like this. I think it's something we need to talk about more often, because we don't. We don't talk about that issue in our communities. How often are Afro-Latinos completely erased from the discussion, right? Like it's ridiculous, and it's and it came from a lot of those problems that I went through. Realizing, like, I'll give you a good example, right? Like growing up, I used to hate being called blanquito. I hated it so much. And I always joke, I'm the lightest person on my mom's side and the darkest person on my dad's side. My dad's side is, Jesus Christ, lily white. But it used to drive me nuts because it made me feel like I didn't belong. And I grew up as a Puerto Rican and I wanted to be in that community. But I'd always get like, oh, blanquito, you a white boy, and it's in retrospect it was just busting chops. It wasn't out of a place of anger. But it's easy to get that in your head, and you feel like, I always felt like, oh, I'm straddling this place. I'm too white to be Puerto Rican, but I'm too Puerto Rican to be white. And taking a step back, going, why the hell do I care about that last part? Right? Like, what does that mean, right? Like, and that's when I kind of broke through, and go, oh, what am I concerned about? At the end of the day, But then I take a look at, I had someone who's an Afro Latina reader tell me that she always struggled with being ostracized from her Colombian side and had to go with her black side, and it gave her pain because she wanted so much to be connected to this other side, and it was blatant. It wasn't like me where it was just jokes. It was just, no, you're not one of us. And that, hearing that from someone and knowing that they were able to read a book that made them feel like a little more seen, one, felt amazing, but two, I think validated my thoughts on that, where it's like, even that problem as a light or white passing Latina isn't really the problem you think it is. And it isn't going to be the same problem as it is for someone who's, has African roots. My brother's black. We have different dads. His dad's a black man, and my brother's black. And, I see that he experiences the world far more differently than I do. And he is so connected to his Puerto Rican roots, but I think a lot of times he's more disconnected from the culture because they don't look at him as Puerto Rican. They look at him as black. Even when he tells them, as opposed to me, when it comes out, oh, this is Angel Colon, he's Puerto Rican. Like now it's accepted. I don't have to, so it's another version of the privilege, right? Like, there's these two-sided privileges, and I wanted to explore that problem because that's a huge problem. We shouldn't do that to each other. Right, like we have that connection. Latinidad is a connection, but also being Puerto Rican is a deeper connection. And we're people that really don't have. I mean, we've been so diluted and filtered that to me, I've realized that to have that mindset that there's a separation shouldn't exist. Like, we are all the same, and we have to cling to each other because there's so little left of us.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and you even saying that, like, 'cause me coming from like a Mexican American background, like. It's like I agree with like the whole like ni de aquí ni de allá, where like you're not from here, you're not from there. Like when I would go to like Mexico too, just because like Spanish was my first language as a kid, but then I learned English, and then you kind of just learn to like just speak it more. Like the only reason I spoke Spanish was because my grandparents didn't speak English. But when I would go to Mexico, it would just feel weird because I would feel more comfortable speaking English. It would just like come natural, and so we would speak it over there in Mexico when we'd go visit, and to them it seemed like we were showing off.
Yeah,
It wasn't. It was just like we are comfortable because that's what we know, or like Spanglish or whatever, like Chicano, right?
I'm indoctrinated. What can I do?
Right. And so it was like, oh, they think they're too good for us now because they're from over there, And it's like, okay, well, I'm like you said, like I'm too American to be Mexican, but then I'm still Mexican here in America to belong here as well, because we're either or. We kind of have to deal with the racism here, so it is tough. And
and it's the same issue in Puerto Rico too, with like I always call myself Nuyorican more often than I call myself Puerto Rican, because I always look at it like, well, culturally, I'm a New Yorker, and I'm a Puerto Rican from New York. It's not, and that's a very different cultural vibe than on the island. Like to your point, right? Like that vibe. Being Mexican from California is a different vibe from Mexican from Texas is a different vibe from Mexican. We're all, at the end of the day, it's blood, but
it's the same thing. But people, like you said, that's why I like the fact that you brought that up in the conversation, and then also like in the book, it plays like a role in the background. And so I really love that. And like I said, I can agree with your friend that I felt like I was finally I can relate to a character. I was like, oh man, like I can see it. Like, and I've been seeing it more. Like I've been reading more like Latino or like Latinx or whatever you want to call them now, like authors, like Sylvia Garcia Moreno. Like she's another one that's really dope. That I started reading her stuff, and I was like, oh my God, I could see myself in some of these characters. Or even if I don't, like the stuff she talks about is like the culture, and I was like, oh, I can like. I know what she's talking about. Like
she's Mexican Canadian too, so you've got this other like perspective in there too.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So I love that, and with the book Infested, to talk a little bit about it too, like the story. Like I wanted to ask you too, because when I was reading it, especially with like the cockroaches and all that stuff, it kind of reminded me of Mimic for some reason. I don't know why, like the movie Mimic, like Guillermo del Toro. Like I kind of wanted to ask you, like, did that ever play a role into this book?
Massive role, absolutely, absolutely. That's one of my favorite monster movies. It introduced me to Guillermo del Toro's work. I adore it. I think it's a fun movie. I'm writing something now where there's a reference to it outright, that they talk about it. I love that movie. But yeah, there was a little bit of that in there. I definitely look to it because there's not a lot of fiction or movies that involve roaches like that. And and I use roaches because there's such a common concept that white supremacy is used to mitigate blame on immigrants or others, right? Like, that concept that these people infest and they bring dirt and filth and disease with them. And I thought it would be interesting to use the roaches, not just because that's something I grew up with, that a lot of awful people saying crap like that, but I had found out that the common cockroach, especially in the Bronx, is the German cockroach. It's the German brown cockroach. And when I found that out, I was like, huh, okay. And I read up more on that, and it came from when the Hessians came here in the 1700s. I was like, oh, okay, so hold up. Whites brought them here. Okay. So I thought that was interesting, and I thought it'd be a fun thing. I don't call it out in the book, but for me, it was just a fun irony to use something that's so often used to blame, so often used against brown and marginalized people, that is no fault of theirs whatsoever, and it's actually the fault of the same people who use it. I thought that was, and that crap is always the case, but I thought it'd be a lot of fun to do that.
That's interesting. That's interesting that you say that too, because right now when you're saying that, I don't know if you've seen. I forgot what it was called. It was John Leguizamo did like a special on Netflix, and I forgot what it was called. But it was like the history of, and he went all like from like Tainos and all that stuff, and it was really interesting. And he says that he's like, it's funny how they blame the indigenous people for bringing all this disease, but it actually was like the white like people, right, like the colonizers. And I was like, of course.
But they handed one person a blanket and everybody died. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, so I love that. Like the roaches were kind of used. It kind of plays even a bigger role if you think about it, like with the whole gentrification. Oh, yeah, like it's a character in itself, like the roaches. And that's why I was like, I remember like it reminded me of Mimic, and I love that movie too. Like Guillermo del Toro is one of my favorite directors, but that movie I just rewatched it. It's one of those comfort movies where I just rewatch. I hate roaches. I think that's one of the insects I hate the most. Because they're just like, one, they're like hard to kill, and then two, I didn't even know they fucking fly. I was like, oh, no, thanks.
That was. I remember that lesson. So, one of my first times in Puerto Rico, seeing one of the big ones, and then it flew at me, and I was like, no, what are y'all doing on this island? This is crazy. I'm not. No, this is not. At least on mine, they just crawl around. Like they fly here, and they made noises. That's crazy. I love that island, but the bugs I saw on that island, I was like, you people are nuts to live here. This is insane. No.
Yeah, I know, man. I couldn't do it. But even here, like, I know right here compared to, like, over there, they're probably, like, tiny. But it's still, I was like, oh, man, these are gross. And then with Guillermo's movie, I was like, it made me even more scared of them. Because I was like, man, imagine if an actual thing became, like a monster. I was like, oh, hell no.
I loved it. I love that the way they had the front arms would turn into the face. That was,
yes,
I love that.
That was, like, really, like, I don't know, how he thought about that was really genius. But so I really love that story, and I kind of wanted to ask too, like, because you kind of allude to it, but I hopefully, like, if people are watching it, maybe like right here, if you haven't read it, like, this is a little bit of a spoiler, but with Mr. Mueller's character, who obviously we find out that he's kind of like what was he, like a ghost, or was he an entity? Because I was trying to figure out, like, what was he that brought him back?
So I like to imagine that he's something that was born of his own hate. So he's not, it's not him anymore. It's not that forgives him for what he did, but it's something that kind of mixed in with that awfulness of him, came together with these roaches and made something that festered, and something that you can't kill, that couldn't die easy.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I thought. I was like, I know it's like some sort of entity, because obviously he was brought back, and then the fact that he can control, like the roaches. I was like, it was interesting concept, which I really enjoyed. And what would you say was your favorite part of, like, writing this, like, novel, and then the most difficult part?
I loved finding out how far I could go with YA, and that they, initially I thought, let me be careful, and then I kept getting notes like, no, you can go ahead, like, no, when you see what you're trying to do here, just do it. So that was fun. I didn't realize, like, the voice spoilers, like, the hand scene in the story, did not anticipate them letting me go as far as I went with that. And I had a blast with that. And it was funny enough that after writing that scene, my favorite part that happened when I was giving ARCs away to friends with kids, because I wanted younger readers to check it out. So it's like I had, like, ran the gamut, like, some 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds. At the time, my son was maybe around 12, and a couple of them, and the majority of them stopped reading after that hand scene. And when I heard that, I was like, "Oh, we got something here." That freaked them out. That's fantastic. So that was a lot of fun. The harder part was trying not to sound like a 40-year-old man writing a teenager. That was,
Yeah.
that becomes the hard part, and kind of realizing, like, so I avoided trying to, like, no slang, because not a lot of kids talk like that either way. You don't. I mean, that's, if anything, maybe small words in passing, but a lot of time, like, kids aren't just throwing out 14 15 word sentences with just like 9 of those words being all slang. Like, that's not how that works.
Yeah.
So I tried to avoid things like that, and I tried to you know lean more into angst, remembering, like, how focused was I on small things as a teenager. Like, when your world is small, you focus on the small things.
Yes. Yeah.
So I focused on that. So you had Manny constantly just whining about his life. You had Sasha kind of focused on a good mission, but in that way that, like, she could be doing it better. She could do it a little more smarts, but she's too young to know any better. She's got good intentions. So I wanted to work with that and kind of make them as naive as I could without them being, caricatures, but, make them feel like people who don't know as much about the world as they're assuming,
Yeah.
because their worlds aren't there yet. They're not necessarily stepping out to the world. And I found that was key. That was really key to write, what I'm hoping are believable teenagers. At the end of the day, that's subjective. I'm sure there's plenty of teenagers that would read the book and go, "We're not like this, dummy, you're old,"
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there are plenty of people like, "Wow, you caught it perfectly." Or, I've had adults tell me, "Yeah, I read this and I thought of my kids." So that was hard, because, you worry about whether or not you're landing that. Because, if the audience is intended to be of that age, you're aiming for 14 to 18-year-olds to read this. You're trying as hard as you can be to be sincerely genuine with it, and not be cynical or mock them. That you don't want to do that.
Yeah, and I definitely, like, for sure, like, reading, like, Manny's character, I get that, like, that angst, and then, like, I have, like, a nephew, so I could, like, see, like, okay, yeah, like, when you're, like you said, it's your little, it's like a little world that you have, like, it's everything matters at that
Yep.
moment. It's like, just like, if something's bad, it's like your whole world is bad, and I could
Oh, yeah.
feel, like, the whole fact, like, that obviously the whole thing where he felt, like, replaced by the newborn, and also, like, the whole new husband with his mom, and, like, moving to a new place and not even giving him the choice, like, all that stuff, like, even it took me back, like, if I were in his place, like, how I would feel as a teenager, like, so
Yeah.
I could feel that in his character. And one thing I do want to give you, like, kudos to, that I really loved about this book, because, as we know, like, in Latino culture, I mean, I'm not saying everybody, because I can't speak for everybody, I'll just speak for my experience, but, like, we are really close to our families, right? And so, like, for me, I was raised by my grandparents, so that's one thing that spoke
So
to
was
me
I.
about Manny. Like, it's the fact that, like, he had that close bond and he lost them. And I think I picked up the book, like, at the right time too, because I literally, like, my grandpa passed away last year in October, and
I'm
so I'm
sorry.
glad I didn't read it then, because
Yep.
I was like, I would have cried. But reading it now, I was like, oh man, like, I love the fact that, like, he kind of went back and, like, thought about, like, all the lessons that he taught him and stuff like that, because I could relate to that part. And so I really love, like, the way you wrote that in, because I was like, I don't see that a lot, and, like, at least in books, maybe I'm right now recollecting bad, but I don't think I've ever seen it like that, where, like, I don't want to talk bad about just other cultures, but, like, white people, like, I've never seen it like that written out in a page, where it's like, oh, this guy cared about his, like, he had like a connection with his grandparents. Like, I felt with at least this particular book, like, the connection, like, I could see, like, okay, I can relate to that character because I had a similar relationship in my life. So
Yeah,
I
and I
really
think
love that.
I think when you look at more marginalized communities, the connection to grandparents is deeper. I'm not going to speak. I could be wrong, but at least from my experience, when with being Puerto Rican, our grandparents were in my like you. I was raised by my grandparents, but even with families that wasn't the case. That was always very important people.
Yes.
I was lucky enough to have my bisabuela in my life until I was 20. She didn't pass away until I was 20 years old. But so I grew up around where that was deeply important.
Yes.
And having my grandparents in my life and supporting me the way they did was absolutely essential to who I am today. I have so much to thank them for. So I came out of that. I wanted to write Manny because I know when I lost both of them, that was gutting. That was a massive, massive loss for me. It was like losing my parents. Well, 100%. I don't think there'd be any difference. And that I wanted, and I thought to I was lucky enough that happened to me in my 30s, so I was a grown man. But if that had happened to me when I was his age, oof, I can't even begin to imagine the headspace I'd have been in. I could easily see myself in being angry and angsty and just a mess, because those at that time, those were the most important people in my life.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I could definitely relate to that. And actually, I don't know if I don't think you might know, but like the 7 Octobers, it's like a homage to my grandma too, because it's already gonna be 10 years that she passed. But like you said about like them like being parents, it is like it was one of those
Oh yeah,
losses, like losing your parents. But
my
yeah, seven
grandmother got me.
Octobers.
My grandmother was the one who got me all out of all my trouble. she,
Yeah.
she, she was always, and she kept it all. No te pure, no te pure, nene. You
Yeah,
know?
right. Like they're always there are our confidants, and like it was a different type of parents because they were
Yeah.
more. At least I don't know about your experience, but for mine it was like they were like the more lenient parents,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Because they weren't technically our parents, so
Yeah.
they watched us and everything. But at the end of the day, they got to go home, and then my parents came over, and took care
Yeah,
of us.
I lived with mine, but the funniest part about that too is, that my grandfather always had this reputation of being like this uncaring monster, and everybody was terrified of him. And then he'd come home and like grab me and hug me, and we watch TV. And I'd be like, "What are you talking about? This is the greatest man that ever lived." But it was always funny because people were terrified of my grandfather, and I'd be like, "I'm not scared of him." They'd be like, "Oh, don't bother him about this." I'm immediately like, "Papi, can I get money to go to the movies?" "Yeah, okay." And everyone was telling me, if you ask him, he's gonna tell you go screw yourself. He's like, "No, here, what do you need?" And just give me and I'd leave. He spoiled the hell out of me, so I was always laughing like, I got that guy wrapped around my finger. Um, but he was, as always, everybody has faults, but they
Yeah,
were deeply important to me.
yeah, no, I can definitely relate, and I love that. And kind of, I wanted to ask you too, like, because it's like a horror podcast. So, what would be like if you had like a top five like horror films? I know it's kind of hard sometimes, but like top five, what would they be?
So I'm gonna pan the camera at that little guy up there.
Flashy, splashy over there.
Slashy, slashy there. So I can't get that right. There it is. So number one's gonna be the Evil Dead series. I'm a huge Evil Dead fan. I think I've watched Evil Dead 2 more than a person should have. Um, I love that movie, so that's definitely I put Evil Dead 2 as number one on my list. Number two would be Brain Dead / Dead Alive by Peter Jackson. That is one of my all-time favorite movies. I had a reputation in college for introducing people to that movie to test whether or not it was worth hanging out with them. I used to tell them, if you can't laugh at this, then I don't know if we can be friends,
Yeah.
because that movie's glorious in every single way. Three, I would put Alien, 'cause I adore that movie. Four, something more modern. I would put what was that? Oh, my brain breaks. I would actually put Pearl, because I fell in love with that movie. And like that quickly moved up very fast. I didn't love Maxine, but Pearl was fantastic, and it still stays with me. And I've watched it more times in the past year than I thought I would. That's 4 or 5. That's a crapshoot, but I'm gonna get
That's hard.
specific. I'm gonna get specific, and it's a silly one, but I love it so much. Is Friday the 13th Part 7.
Oh, I love that one. I don't know if you see like my little Friday the 13th back there.
I see.
7. I love 7 too, and actually behind me the Jason from 7.
I know Seven's not. It's not. I mean,
It's
it's
not
not
the
a good
best.
movie. It's not.
Yeah, it's not. I just love like I don't know if it's for you, but like for me, I love that was my favorite. Like Kane Hodder obviously played him, and then like the way he was dressed, like his whole like
It's
that one was
perfect.
like my favorite.
It's the first one I saw in the movie theaters. I was old enough to finally go. Like one of my cousins, and I loved it. Everything
And come
about
on, it's
it.
like a Carrie versus Jason.
Yeah,
Like you
it's
have
so
to do that.
it's so much fun. It's so comic booky.
Yeah.
But it's definitely like a comfort watch for me. Like if I'm in the mood to watch something silly, I'll put on Friday the 13th 7. I'll put on any Friday the 13th and be happy. I
Yeah.
remember introducing my wife to the series with 10.
Oh yeah, no, that's not a good one. Come
Such a
on.
mistake. She's sitting there like, the fuck are we watching? And I'm like, listen, no, you have to understand. he kills all the people you hate, so you get something out of this. Like you're like, I don't like that person, and you know what? He's gonna handle it for you. You know, and she was like, shit, and then she's like, oh, okay, I get it. And then there was one or two characters. Well, he didn't kill that person. I would have liked for him to kill that person. I'm like, he can't get all of them, but he gets most of them. But it's that's another one that is so gloriously stupid. And sometimes I think I'm a big fan of horror that, like, I can get down with horror that takes itself seriously. That's fine. You know, to an extent. I don't love the edgelord stuff, but you know, I know there's like, what was the name of that Argentine movie that came out maybe 2 or 3 years ago?
Oh, is it the When Evil Lurks one, the new one, or I love that one.
I enjoyed that. It was messed up, but I enjoyed it.
The director.
I don't know if I want to watch it again, but
Yeah, it is dark. Yeah, it's kind of dark.
like, it's not a movie I can just turn on and be like, let me enjoy this. You know, like, it was definitely like, damn, okay,
Yeah.
what's up? And part of me going, like, what's
It
up?
leaves you fucked up for sure.
Yeah, I want to be like, what's up, with my Argentinian cousins? You guys okay? Like this. But that, you know, like I can vibe on that. But for me, I love horror comedy. I don't. There's something about
Same.
the decompression you can get from a laugh after something insane. You know, like that you see in Evil Dead, that you see in Dead Alive, Brain Dead. You know, even like Return of the Living Dead. I find that movie to be hysterical.
Yeah.
You know, as compared to something like Night of the Living Dead, because Return of the Living Dead, I mean, you have that cop scene where the zombie grabs the machine, he's like, send more cops. Brilliant. No notes. Like that, no notes. I love crap like that. And I'm a fan. I like doing that in my own writing. I like to decompress and because I also find, I think that's a little more realistic in some ways when you go through trauma, at least from where I'm from, you know, gallows humor and using humor to get through it.
Yeah,
I
that
think is
true.
more realistic sometimes than just straight, you know, black and white, you know, just pure horror. Like, yeah, there's moments, but I always feel like if you don't have a little beat of something that can kind of soothe the mood before that next ebb, that's not my favorite way of handling it. Even though there's plenty of writers and filmmakers that can do it and they do it well. I mean, it's like you know, top of mind movie like Martyrs, a French movie, which is bonkers. But again, I thought it was excellent. I really enjoyed it. You know, but also, you know, it's one of those movies. I'm like, watched it, we're good. You know, if I had my choice, it would not be the first thing I'd put on with company. But I thought it had, you know, an interesting message. I thought the gore was rough and it was difficult, and a lot of times I think that's something that I'm impressed by when somebody can make gore difficult, because sometimes gore can just be funny nowadays, even if the thing is taking it straight.
Yeah.
With the CG and everything, there are times I've laughed my ass off at a movie I should not be laughing my ass off. But I love horror comedy. That's something that I'm very attuned to, and I always try to get some laughs in there somehow.
Yeah, I can relate to, yeah, because that's probably one of my top subgenres if done right. Like, because there's some, like you said, where it's like just too silly and it's like, oh no, it's not. But like if done right, like I don't know if you've seen Deadstream too, like that one. Came
That was
out.
great, and that was
was a
very
good one.
very
Like a
very
recent one?
Raimi Evil Dead vibe. Yeah,
Yes.
it had
Yeah,
that same
was-
vibe. You know, as opposed to, like, I know a lot of people love the Terrifier movies, and I'm the kind of person, I don't slight people for liking things. If you
Yeah.
like it, that's fantastic. We all have different tastes.
Yes.
To me, I sat through the two of them, and I was like, it was a little too itchy and scratchy for me. You know, it was just it got to a point where I was like, I'm rolling my eyes. I'm like, I see what people see in this. Like, I love Art the Clown, love that design. I think one of the best looking murderers in any of these movies in years. Love the design, but it's not for me. You know, at the end of the day, it's
Yeah.
like I'm happy it found an audience, and you know, so that art direction. I think art is dope, but it is what it is. You know, it's fine. You know, and that's
Yeah.
I think that's the beauty of horror, that you can find your own little niche and like enjoy what you like, because there's plenty of people that like more. Like, I always get mad when people get like, oh, the horror movie, it's PG-13. Like, yeah, whatever, who cares? PG-13 horror can be good. Like, you know,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be bloody. I enjoyed Megan. That movie was hysterical. I had a blast with that movie. You know, so I think, and also, you know, going back to the YA thing, how are we going to get new audience if we can't introduce them early? You know, you don't always have to introduce kids to something crazy. You can ease them into it, and you know, that I think that's the purpose. The thing you mentioned before, like, you know, like those books like Goosebumps and all that stuff. Like, I think those are vital, because not everybody can come in running. Like, me reading Clive Barker at 14, when I look at it in retrospect, I'm like, yikes. I started pretty high up on the totem pole of bonkers crap to read, I didn't have to. I just kind of bumped into it. But nowadays with my kids, I don't think, my son's 14 now, and part of me I was like, should I hand him a Clive Barker novel? Like, is he gonna be okay? I don't know. He's a little more sheltered than I was. Like, I don't know if he's gonna be able to handle something like that. So part of me's like, man, you want to check out Goosebumps? You want to check out, like these other things, like slide into it, and then we can maybe get into the crazy stuff if you want to, right? But I love the idea that horror can be anything to anyone. I never judge. I can't stand people who do that either.
Yeah, and I agree. And I love, like you said, there's some horror movies that are like people love, I don't like or whatever. But like you said, like that's what I love about the beauty of like those subgenres. Like there's all these different subgenres. You like what you. That's why I was like, I've never got the fact where people like me trash talking in the comments. I'm like, dude, if you don't like it, just don't watch it. That's all you gotta do. Like turn it off.
Doesn't appeal to you.
It's not doing anything to you, right? So I'm like, I just laugh.
And there's so much now. Like it's not like we're lacking for movies and books, and there's so much for you to enjoy. Like if it isn't for you, if it isn't made for you, that's okay.
Yeah, that's why I like when I review stuff. Like I review what I love. I've never got the fact that's like I'm gonna review and talk shit about a movie. I'm like, why am I gonna waste my time like talking about a movie I don't like? I'd rather talk about a movie I do love and I enjoyed and why I enjoyed it. So
I do the same with books. Like if I don't finish a book, I don't bring it up. Why am I gonna? I'm not gonna trash it. It wasn't for me. Because I know there's plenty of books that I haven't finished or I didn't enjoy that I know friends of mine, family love, and again, it spoke to them. That's the point of art. To me, something if it speaks to somebody, it speaks to somebody. It's like my own work. I knew Infested. One of my badges of honor is I don't dip into reviews, but the times I do, I always look at the worst ones. I want to know. And I look at it because I want to know who's mad at me. And when I look at the reviews for Infested, and it's literally all white women who are mad at the book, I call it a success.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah,
because at the end of the day, one, I didn't write this for y'all at all. Two, I know why you're mad. I know why you're mad. It's interesting how they all bring up Sasha. So for me, that's a win. Like if I'm like, oh, if Sasha pissed you off, big win, big win. That tells me I did her right. I'm happy, thrilled. But again, that's the thing to me is like, why even be mad? Why even? Like, it's not for you. It was never intended for you, and that's okay. It's okay for art to not be for you. And I think a lot of folks, I think maybe it's easier for me to say that as a Puerto Rican because all the art was never intended for me. I had to just make do of what I could get and learn to be empathetical and learn to relate to people who aren't like me. I'm not a Goonies fan. How the hell am I going to relate to a bunch of white boys on bikes in Oregon? In what universe do I relate to that? I'm from the South Bronx. I never had a bike. I walked everywhere, So, but I still watched it, and that's the thing I think people need to understand that it doesn't have to be custom built for you. If anything, you should search for things that aren't custom built for you. I found that I get the most enjoyment from stuff like that.
Yeah, that is true. And I was gonna say too, like if you could watch like a horror movie for the first time, what movie would it be and why?
It's one of my favorite stories to tell. It would be Ringu all over again. So I adore the Japanese version of Ring, and I was introduced to it in 2000. It was the year after it was released in Japan. I knew a guy. Oddly enough, the guy's name was Manny. He owned a video store in the Bronx. It was like an independent video store. It was just at the dawn of DVD, so he still carried tons of VHS stuff, but he was like super into international releases. So one day I come in, and he knew I was like into whatever weird crap he would recommend me, because I wanted to just devour everything, and I was getting super into a lot of because at that time you had Korean, Japanese movies were really like doing some cool stuff. You had like Session 9, Takashi Miike was coming up, so you had Audition, and then Ichi the Killer, all these bonkers movies. And he's like, oh dude, you gotta check out this Japanese horror movie I just found. It's called Ringu. And I'm like, okay. And he hands me the VHS tape. VHS tape, bootlegged, so it's handwritten on the front, Ringu. Right? I put that in. I'm watching it. It's like I was bartending at the time, so I think I had an early day. I was home like at midnight, so I put it on because I couldn't sleep. And the tracking, and for folks who don't know, back in the day, in the olden days when you had a VHS player, there was a dial called tracking, and it was a dial you had to sometimes screw with because the tape wasn't quite aligned, and it would start getting jacked up, like your picture would get screwed up. So you had to screw with the tracking so that the picture would settle down and you'd have a straight picture. As I age myself with that, I feel ancient right now. So the tracking's all screwed up, so I'm messing with the tracking, and then I just get Sadako's eye, just the eye, for 3 solid goddamn minutes. This eye, I'm like fast forwarding, like what the fuck is this? And to the point where I'm like, did he give me like Faces of Death? What is this nonsense? Like, it's like, And then finally the movie starts. And I watch the movie. It's a great movie. And I am just ignorant to everything. I knew nothing about it. I'm just like glued to the TV, like, oh my God. You have that great scene when the mother tells the kid, it's okay, I helped her. And the kid's like, you weren't supposed to help her. And you're like, oh no. And they cut to the husband's room and the well appears in the TV. And then she starts coming out and then they show her stupid eye. And I nearly crapped my pants. I was like, oh my God, that's what that was. Freaked me out. Movie ends. And I swear to God, the phone rang. As soon as it ended, my girlfriend, now my wife, called me up. And I almost ran out my apartment, like screaming. I was completely freaked out. Just completely freaked out. So that would be, if I could do that again, absolutely, in a minute. Because it was just it was that perfect experience. You're by yourself, you're glued to it, and you're terrified the entire time. It's a beautiful horror experience of just like, can you last? Can you watch this? Should you shut it off? Oh my God,
That's an awesome story.
I have the softest spot for that movie, and that was such a great experience that every time, so I was that guy in college that was always showing people like movies, and every time I'd show people that movie or Ring 2, I used to have a friend call my dorm room at the end of the movie.
That's funny.
Just to mess with people.
And what about, because you're from the Bronx, the mecca of hip hop, so I have to ask, like, also, like, if you had like 5 either hip hop albums or rap songs, like what would they be like if you have a top 5?
My goodness. So number 1 with a bullet, A Tribe Called Quest, Midnight Marauders. I wore through 3 cassettes of that album. I know every word to every song. I adore that album. Phife Dawg is one of my favorite MCs of all time. After that, 36 Chambers, Wu-Tang. That's a gimme. De La, 3 Foot High. And then, as much as a 90s head as I am, I got to give it up to Kendrick. Mad City is an amazing album.
Yes,
I love that album. That's 4. And I'm going to give 5. Let me think about this hard. Let me think about this real hard. Yeah, I'd have to say MF Doom's Food as my number 5. I'm a huge MF Doom head too. And I loved MF Doom from when he was Zev Love X and EPMD. But he's probably my all-time favorite MC. But yeah, that's my, like, I'm a big 90s guy, but there's some modern stuff I'm enjoying now. Like I've gotten deep into you get into those rabbit holes. I started getting into Mac Miller.
Oh yeah,
I enjoyed his stuff quite a bit. He was gifted, man. It's a shame he's gone so young.
Yeah, definitely.
Him and I love Childish Gambino. His new album was great.
I need to listen to it. I haven't listened to the new one.
It's pretty, it's his standard stuff, but I like that he goes through the melodic and then he'll do some other stuff, and I'm a sucker for that kind of crap.
Yeah, those are great picks. And then before we get out of here, I usually like to end it with this question: is what kind of legacy would you like to leave behind, either creatively or personally?
Creatively, now that I've gotten into YA and I'm writing more YA and doing more middle grade stuff, I want to be what Barker was to me. I want one kid. If I can scare the hell out of one kid, right? If I can scare the hell out of one kid and make them want to do that back, that would be a hell of a thing. That would be I would love to know whether I know or not, but I think that would be a hell of a thing.
Yeah.
Personally, it boils down to just leaving behind 2 kids that make the world a little better.
Awesome, yeah.
I think that, as a parent, that's a big important job of mine, is to, before I leave this place, is to, what I leave behind doesn't make things worse.
Yeah.
So that's important to me, and also just instilling to them, because they're more filtered than I was, so just trying to ensure that they embrace the cultures that they come from, whether that be their Puerto Rican culture, or on their mom's side, the Italian and German. I want them to be close to their cultures and to be proud of who they are, and to recognize that what a great thing it is to be of many, despite what the histories are. But to be of many, I think, is powerful.
No, I agree. Yeah, and that's beautiful. I always love to ask that question because I love to like hear people's responses, and I just want to like thank you again, Angel, for being
Thank
here,
you.
and I really enjoyed the conversation. And before we get out of here too, like I know you mentioned you're working on something, but is there anything new that you're working on right now that you could talk about, or
I in the next couple of weeks, I think there's an announcement. I can't talk about it
okay,
just yet. It's a middle grade book. What's kind of dope about it is it's for something a lot of people know about. I think I might be. I'm pretty sure I'm the first Puerto Rican to write in this world. But it's really, I'm excited. I'm excited to announce that. And if things work out, I'll hopefully be writing another Latina focused horror novel in the next couple months. I'm hoping, fingers crossed. This one's a slasher.
nice. Is it more adult or young adult still?
Still YA, but this one's going to be a little meaner, since I've always wanted to write a slasher. I've got kills in my mind and everything, so hopefully if this happens, the publisher's not going to be too upset with some of the ideas I have. But that's exciting because I can't think of a Latina slasher, so I would love to be someone who puts that together. And we're trying to sell other books. I've got adult stuff. There's one or two things I've got it done that are very Puerto Rican based, and one being focused on the folklore of the Vejigante, which is a not necessarily a demon, but it's a monster in Puerto Rican culture that makes evil go away. But it's ironically something that we took from Spain that was super racist, and we made it our own,
Oh
which is
wow,
kind of
okay, that's
interesting.
interesting. Yeah.
And the other one, a little more about the history of Puerto Rico and lucha libre. Lucha libre.
I'm
You
wearing
know,
like a lucha libre. I don't know if you can kind of see. Let me see
yeah.
if I can. I got this like lucha libre with the werewolf one. Just,
So,
uh, that's
because
really dope.
everybody knows the Mexican connection, but not a
Yeah, I
lot of
didn't.
people know that there's a very deep history in Puerto Rico as well.
Oh wow.
Um,
Okay, that's
and
interesting.
Puerto Ricans love wrestling. And there's a history going back to the 40s and 50s. Ironically, not related, but one of the most famous wrestling families in Puerto Rico are Colognes.
Okay.
Um, but my grandfather was always obsessed with it. My great grandmother was too.
Yeah.
So I grew up in a wrestling family, so I wanted to write about that and kind of like the connection that Puerto Ricans have to it as well.
Yeah.
Um, so I thought that would be a lot of fun. So hopefully they'll see the light of day. We'll
Yes,
see.
I'm crossing my fingers, and then we can
Yeah.
have you back because I would love to talk about those, future endeavors you got.
Yeah, let me just say too, I just wanted to put it out there, like I'm so happy to be on a podcast that's Latina focused, that's Latina hosted. I think this is dope. I wish you all the most success, and whatever you need from me, I'll boost you as much as I can. Like this is, you know, important to me that we get to do things like this because we don't often get to.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think sometimes I forget too, like being a woman, like brown, all these different things. But it's like it is important because I hope, like kind of like you said, like creatively, like I hope I inspire people like that look like me, that might have
Yes.
not had something, that look like me, to be like, oh, she can do it, then I can do and do my, like especially me being in like a mainstream type of hip hop and horror, male dominated, and then also uh, predominantly like different cultures that is not brown. So I was like. I
Exactly.
do got to give myself those flowers, and I appreciate you saying that.
No, 100%. And that fan base exists, and more people got to know that. Like, it isn't just default white that loves these things. I think, if anything, marginalized folks love these things far more than people realize,
Yeah,
because I know growing up, horror was deeply big in my family. wrestling, all these things that people never really consider that to be the case. And to me, we have to see more of ourselves in the work, but we also have to see more of ourselves
Represented in the field.
examining it too, right? And
Yeah,
like breaking it
yeah,
apart and looking at it
that's true.
because, at the end of the day, yeah, we can create it as much as we want, but if we're not allowed to examine it and criticize it too, like just take it in and put our own spin on it, then ultimately, I think we're not getting the full experience, and we're not getting the full like breadth of representation we deserve.
That is true. Yeah. Well, thank you again, Angel, and don't be a stranger. Like you're welcome
Yeah,
anytime.
no
So if
doubt.
you ever have anything to promote, you're always welcome back.
I'll absolutely bother you. Thank you so much.
Alrighty. Thank you. Have a good night.
You too.
Bye.